Imagine standing on a high stone terrace. As the sun slowly sinks behind distant mountains, the last golden light spreads across polished limestone. Towering columns cast long shadows across the royal courtyards, while the air itself seems to glow with shades of amber and crimson. Beyond the palace, endless plains stretch toward rugged mountain ranges, and everywhere you look, there are signs of incredible wealth. Finely carved stone, brilliant blue lapis lazuli, gleaming gold, intricate reliefs carved by craftsmen whose work would outlive them by thousands of years. This is ancient Persia, not the Persia of fantasy, but the real civilization that once ruled much of the known world, an empire so vast, so organized, and so influential that even after it disappeared, its memory continued inspiring storytellers for more than 2,000 years. Many people first hear the words Prince of Persia and immediately picture impossible leaps across collapsing walls, magical daggers that reverse time, deadly traps hidden inside magnificent palaces, mysterious princesses, forgotten temples, and adventures filled with supernatural forces. Those stories are works of fiction, but they were not created from nothing. Behind every magnificent palace in the games, there were real palaces. Behind every royal court, there were actual kings and princes. Behind every tale of betrayal, there were genuine conspiracies. Behind every legendary empire, there stood one of history's greatest civilizations. The magic belongs to imagination, but the world itself, the architecture, the traditions, the ceremonies, the politics, the royal families, the gardens, the military power, and the astonishing ambition, all have roots in real history. That is what makes Persia so fascinating. The truth is not less interesting than the legend. In many ways, it is far more remarkable. Tonight, we are leaving fantasy behind, not because imagination has no value, but because history itself offers adventures grand enough to stand beside any work of fiction. Our journey begins more than 25 centuries ago, long before Alexander the Great, long before Rome ruled the Mediterranean, and centuries before Europe emerged as a dominant force in world affairs. The Near East was already home to ancient civilizations whose histories stretched back thousands of years. Mesopotamia had given humanity some of its earliest cities. Egypt had raised monuments that still astonish us today. Babylon stood as one of the greatest cities ever built. Power constantly shifted between kingdoms, alliances, and rival empires. No one could have guessed that a relatively small kingdom in the Iranian plateau would soon unite these lands under a single ruler. That ruler was Cyrus. His name would become legendary during his own lifetime. Even his enemies respected him. Ancient writers who disagreed on almost everything else often found themselves acknowledging the unusual character of the Persian king. Like many extraordinary historical figures, Cyrus's early life became wrapped in legend. Stories surrounded his birth almost immediately. Ancient people loved to explain greatness through prophecy. Whenever someone transformed history, storytellers often imagined that destiny had announced itself before the child was even born. One tradition claimed that Cyrus's grandfather, Astyages, king of the Medes, dreamed that his future grandson would one day overthrow him. Dreams carried enormous importance in the ancient world. Kings consulted priests and interpreters because dreams were believed to reveal messages from gods. A frightening dream could shape political decisions. According to later Greek accounts, Astyages became terrified after hearing the interpretation. Instead of welcoming his grandson, he supposedly ordered the infant to be killed. It is a familiar pattern. History and mythology often overlap. A helpless child, a fearful ruler, a prophecy, a servant ordered to commit an unthinkable act. Then mercy. Instead of carrying out the command, the servant allegedly handed the child to a shepherd. The boy grew up among ordinary people, unaware of his true identity. Only years later, the truth supposedly emerged, fulfilling the very prophecy the king had tried to prevent. Whether these events happened exactly as described remains uncertain. Modern historians approach such stories with caution. Ancient authors frequently mixed fact with symbolism. They wanted readers to understand not only what happened, but what they believed destiny intended. Yet regardless of how Cyrus spent his childhood, there is no debate about what he achieved as an adult. That achievement changed the course of history. Around the middle of the 6th century before the Common Era, Cyrus became ruler of the Persians. At that time, Persia was not yet the dominant force it would become. The Medes held greater influence. The Persians were respected, but they remained subordinate within the broader regional balance of power. Most rulers might have accepted such a position. Cyrus did not. He possessed an extraordinary combination of patience, military ability, political intelligence, and personal charisma. Instead of rushing into reckless conflict, he spent years strengthening his position. He built alliances, won loyalty, studied his rivals, prepared carefully. When the moment finally arrived, he challenged Median authority. The struggle lasted several years. Victory was far from guaranteed. Ancient warfare demanded far more than bravery. Armies depended on supplies, alliances, discipline, and leadership. Battles were often decided before swords ever met. Through diplomacy, planning, and logistics, eventually, Cyrus's forces prevailed. The Median capital fell. Something remarkable followed. Instead of endless revenge and destruction, many Median nobles accepted Cyrus as their new king. This decision would shape the future of the empire. Rather than ruling through terror alone, Cyrus showed an unusual talent for turning former enemies into supporters. He understood something many conquerors never learned. Lasting empires require more than military victories. They require cooperation, respect, and stability. The union of the Persians and Medes created a new political power unlike anything the region had previously seen. But Cyrus had no intention of stopping there. To the west stood Lydia, a kingdom famous throughout the ancient world. Its ruler, King Croesus, became almost synonymous with wealth. Even today, ancient expressions about someone being rich as Croesus survive because of his legendary fortune. Gold flowed through Lydia. Its capital, Sardis, controlled valuable trade routes connecting Asia and the Mediterranean. Its prosperity attracted admiration, envy, and ambition. Croesus watched Persian expansion with growing concern. Powerful neighbors always make each other nervous. Eventually, he sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi, one of the Greek world's most respected religious centers. The response seemed encouraging. The oracle declared that if Croesus crossed the border and attacked Persia, a great empire would fall. It sounded like certainty. It sounded like divine approval. But ancient prophecies often possessed a cruel sense of irony. Croesus invaded. War followed. Battles unfolded across Anatolia. At first, neither side gained a decisive advantage. Many rulers would have paused after such an inconclusive campaign. Cyrus pressed forward. He pursued Croesus relentlessly. Finally, Persian forces reached Sardis. The city fell, and the empire destroyed by Croesus's decision turned out to be his own. Ancient sources later claimed that Cyrus spared the defeated king. Some traditions even suggest Croesus became one of Cyrus's advisors. Whether every detail is accurate remains debated, but once again, the larger pattern appears consistent. Cyrus repeatedly demonstrated that mercy, when wisely applied, could strengthen rather than weaken imperial authority. Instead of destroying conquered peoples, he frequently incorporated them into his growing empire. Every victory expanded Persian influence. Every successful campaign added new languages, customs, religions, and traditions. Unlike many earlier conquerors, Cyrus faced the challenge of ruling extraordinary diversity. His empire was becoming too vast for simple domination. It required administration, flexibility, organization. The greatest test still lay ahead. To the south, beyond the great rivers of Mesopotamia, stood Babylon. Few cities inspired greater awe. Its walls were legendary. Its temples dominated the skyline. Its scholars preserved centuries of knowledge. Its wealth seemed almost limitless. Generations had considered Babylon nearly impossible to conquer. Yet Cyrus approached not only as a military commander, but also as a master of political strategy, rather than presenting himself merely as an invader. He portrayed himself as a ruler chosen to restore proper order. Babylon's own king, Nabonidus, had become unpopular among portions of his population. Religious tensions weakened internal unity. Cyrus recognized opportunity. Ancient records suggest Persian forces entered Babylon with surprisingly limited resistance. One long-standing tradition claims engineers diverted part of the Euphrates River, allowing soldiers to enter through sections normally protected by water. Whether events unfolded exactly this way remains debated among historians. But Babylon nevertheless passed into Persian control with far less destruction than many ancient conquests. For Cyrus, capturing the city marked only the beginning. Holding it mattered even more. Here, his approach differed strikingly from that of many conquerors before him. Instead of humiliating Babylon's traditions, he respected them. Instead of abolishing local religion, he honored important temples. Instead of forcing cultural uniformity, he allowed conquered peoples to preserve many of their own customs. Among those affected were the Jewish communities exiled decades earlier by Babylonian kings. Cyrus authorized many of them to return to their homeland and rebuild religious institutions. That decision would become one of the reasons later generations remembered him with unusual admiration. His reputation spread not simply because he conquered, but because he governed differently than many expected. Modern discussions sometimes describe the famous Cyrus Cylinder as an early declaration of human rights. That description is more symbolic than literal. The cylinder is best understood as a royal inscription explaining Cyrus's legitimacy, celebrating his conquest, and presenting his policies according to the traditions of the ancient Near East. Even so, it reflects a governing philosophy that relied less on indiscriminate destruction and more on political inclusion. That approach proved remarkably successful. As Persia expanded, local populations often found cooperation more attractive than endless resistance. The empire grew across mountains, deserts, fertile river valleys, and coastlines. Its territory stretched farther than anything the ancient world had yet seen. Merchants crossed immense distances under Persian authority. Officials communicated across thousands of kilometers. Roads linked distant provinces. Different cultures remained distinct, yet increasingly connected. This was no loose collection of conquered lands. It was becoming a functioning imperial system. Of course, no empire remains at peace forever. Even Cyrus could not escape mortality. Late in his reign, he campaigned once more toward the northeastern frontiers. Ancient sources disagree about the precise circumstances. Some describe fierce battles against nomadic tribes. Others offer different versions. What seems most likely is that Cyrus died during one of these military campaigns around 530 BCE. His death marked the end of one life, but not the end of the empire he created. By then, the foundations had already been laid. Future kings would inherit territories stretching across 3 continents. Future princes would grow up surrounded by unimaginable luxury, but also constant danger. Because becoming part of the royal family did not guarantee safety, it often guaranteed the opposite. The larger the empire became, the greater the stakes surrounding succession. Every son of the king carried possibility. Every ambitious noble watched carefully. Every alliance mattered. Every rumor could become deadly. The magnificent palaces that later generations would admire were not merely homes. They were arenas where power constantly shifted, where loyalty could determine survival, and where one mistaken decision might end an entire dynasty. The romantic image of Persian princes living lives of endless comfort hides a much harsher reality. Behind polished stone floors, richly embroidered robes, and lavish banquets stood a world where trust was precious, ambition was dangerous, and history could change almost overnight. The empire that Cyrus founded would continue growing after him, reaching heights even he might never have imagined. Its rulers would construct cities whose beauty astonished visitors from every corner of the known world. Its influence would spread across languages, religions, trade routes, and generations. And within those magnificent royal courts, the lives of Persia's princes would become every bit as dramatic as the legends that later surrounded them. When Cyrus the Great died, the empire he created did not disappear with him. Instead, it continued expanding under those who inherited his vision, each generation adding new cities, new provinces, new peoples, and new achievements, until Persia stood as the largest political power the ancient world had yet witnessed. Among all the cities connected to this enormous empire, one eventually became the greatest symbol of Persian royal authority, not because it controlled daily government, but because it represented something even more important, the identity of the empire itself. That city was Persepolis. Even today, more than 2,000 years after flames consumed much of its splendor, its ruins still leave visitors speechless. Broken columns rise into the sky like the remains of a forgotten forest made of stone. staircases worn smooth by countless footsteps still lead upward toward empty halls, and carved reliefs continue telling silent stories that have survived longer than entire civilizations. Imagine approaching the city during its greatest age. The road gradually climbs toward a vast stone terrace carved directly into the mountainside. Long before reaching the entrance, travelers would already understand they were approaching somewhere unlike anywhere else in the ancient world. The platform itself dominated the surrounding landscape. It was not built simply because it looked impressive. Its elevation transformed every arrival into a carefully staged experience. The higher visitors climbed, the more the city revealed itself. The empire quite literally rose above the plain. Nothing here happened by accident. Persian royal architecture communicated power before a single official ever spoke. Every staircase, every doorway, every column, every carved figure carried meaning. Even the approach was designed to inspire awe. The main stairway leading upward was unusually wide. Its steps were surprisingly shallow, unlike many monumental staircases built to impress through steepness. This one allowed people to climb comfortably, even while leading horses, carrying gifts, or escorting valuable animals. That practical design served an important purpose. Every year, delegations from across the empire gathered here during the Great New Year celebration. Representatives arrived from lands separated by thousands of kilometers. Some came from Egypt, others from Babylon. Some traveled from the mountains of Armenia. Others crossed deserts from Arabia. Still others journeyed from Central Asia, the Indus Valley, and the eastern frontiers. Each delegation brought gifts representing the wealth of its homeland. Fine textiles, rare woods, precious metals, beautiful horses, ivory, jewelry, exotic animals, spices, perfumes, objects unlike anything produced in Persia itself. The long procession climbed these same gentle steps, not rushing, not struggling, but moving steadily toward the heart of imperial ceremony. Imagine standing there as the procession unfolds. Colorful clothing from dozens of different cultures fills the stairway. Languages from across 3 continents mingle in the air. Musicians perform ceremonial music. Officials direct arrivals with practiced precision. The scent of incense mixes with mountain breezes. Above everything rises the palace complex. Waiting, silent, magnificent. At the top stood one of the empire's most remarkable entrances, known today as the Gate of All Nations. It announced immediately that Persia considered itself ruler of a world made up of many peoples rather than one nation alone. Massive stone guardians flanked the entrance. Creatures with the bodies of bulls, powerful wings, and human faces. These protective figures reflected artistic traditions inherited from Mesopotamia. The Persians rarely rejected useful ideas simply because another culture had created them. Instead, they adopted, adapted, and transformed influences into something distinctly Persian. Above the gateway, royal inscriptions proclaimed the authority of the king, not in one language, but in several. Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian. That multilingual message revealed something fundamental about the empire. Persia ruled enormous diversity. Communication required flexibility. Administration depended on understanding many cultures rather than forcing everyone into one identity. Passing through the gateway, visitors entered a world carefully designed to overwhelm the senses. Great halls stretched before them. Forests of stone columns supported towering wooden roofs. Sunlight filtered through open spaces, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow across polished floors. Everywhere appeared carved reliefs celebrating royal authority. But unlike monuments built solely around scenes of conquest, many Persian carvings emphasize something different: order, harmony, cooperation. The famous Apadana, the great audience hall, stood among the finest architectural achievements of the ancient world. Its roof rested upon dozens of towering columns, each rising far above the people gathered below. Imagine entering such a space for the first time. Voices echo softly beneath the immense ceiling. Bright fabrics decorate ceremonial areas. Officials stand in carefully arranged positions. Royal guards remain motionless. Ambassadors wait patiently. Every movement follows established etiquette. The architecture itself encourages discipline. Small details become almost impossible to ignore. The columns are not plain. Their capitals support enormous sculpted animals. Bulls, lions, mythical creatures, each carved with astonishing precision. Even today, after centuries of weathering, their craftsmanship remains extraordinary. The surrounding walls display one of the greatest historical records left by the Persian Empire. Delegations from across the empire appear carved into stone, not as defeated prisoners, not as chained captives, but as representatives bringing gifts. Each group wears distinctive clothing, different hairstyles, different beards, different weapons, different footwear. Their identities remain recognizable. Historians still study these reliefs because they preserve valuable evidence about the astonishing diversity of Persian rule. You can identify Medes by their clothing, Babylonians carrying textiles, Armenians leading horses, Lydians presenting elegant vessels, Ethiopians bringing ivory, Indians carrying gold dust, Arabians guiding camels. The empire truly stretched across an immense portion of the known world. Standing among those carvings, one realizes that Persia governed not by erasing difference, but by organizing it. The message becomes unmistakable. Many peoples, one king, many traditions, one empire. This idea stood at the center of Persian political identity. Nearby stood the private palaces built for members of the royal family. Compared with the public halls, they were smaller, yet smaller remains a relative term. These residences still contained spacious reception rooms, decorated chambers, administrative offices, storage facilities, gardens, and courtyards connected through carefully planned passageways. This was where Persian princes spent much of their childhood. Imagine waking before sunrise inside one of these palaces. Servants are already awake. The household has been active for hours. Food is prepared. Animals cared for. Officials organize the day's schedule. Messages arrive from distant provinces. Scribes record information onto tablets. Priests conduct rituals. Nothing inside the royal household operates casually. Every hour serves a purpose. The young prince's life begins almost immediately with instruction. Unlike modern children, royal sons possessed very little personal freedom. Their future had already been decided. Whether they eventually ruled or not, they represented the dynasty. Every action reflected upon the royal family. Every lesson prepared them for responsibilities few people could even imagine. Their clothing reflected their status. Fine linen, carefully woven fabrics, embroidered garments, belts decorated with precious metals, jewelry appropriate to rank. Appearance mattered because public image mattered. Royal dignity required visible discipline. Meals introduced foods gathered from every region of the empire. Fresh fruits, bread, roasted meats, fish, dates, pomegranates, honey, nuts, wine for adults, herbs and spices transported across astonishing distances. The empire's enormous trade network placed luxuries from many lands upon royal tables. Yet luxury alone never defined Persian royal life. Education occupied nearly every day. From childhood onward, princes learned that privilege carried obligation. Teachers instructed them in reading and writing. Old Persian served ceremonial purposes. Aramaic functioned as the empire's administrative language. Later generations often encountered Greek as well. Language represented power. A prince capable of communicating across cultures governed more effectively than one limited to a single tongue. History formed another essential subject. Royal children studied the achievements of earlier kings. They learned about Cyrus, about campaigns that united Persia, about victories, mistakes, treaties, rebellions, and diplomatic decisions. Their ancestors became living examples. Some inspired admiration. Others warned against arrogance. Religion shaped every aspect of education. The dominant faith throughout the empire, Zoroastrianism, taught that human beings constantly face choices between truth and falsehood, order and chaos. These ideas influence politics as much as personal morality. A future king did not simply govern territory. He was expected to uphold justice, protect truth, reward loyalty, punish deception. Whether rulers always lived according to these ideals is another matter entirely, but the ideals themselves remained powerful. The famous Greek historian Herodotus summarized Persian education with 3 memorable skills: ride well, shoot accurately, and tell the truth. The phrase sounds simple, almost poetic, yet behind those words lay years of demanding practice. Horsemanship was indispensable. Persia depended heavily upon cavalry. Princes practically grew up in the saddle. They learned balance before many children elsewhere learned reading. Mounted archery required astonishing coordination. A rider controlled the horse with knees while drawing powerful composite bows, aiming accurately despite constant movement. These were not ceremonial exercises. Future kings often led armies personally. Physical weakness carried political consequences. Strength inspired confidence. Weakness encouraged rivals. Hunting formed another major part of royal education. Modern readers sometimes imagine hunting merely as entertainment. For Persian nobles, it served far deeper purposes. Royal game parks contained dangerous animals: lions, wild boars, bears, large predators. These hunts developed courage, discipline, coordination, leadership. A prince who remained calm, facing a charging lion, would likely remain calm amid battlefield chaos. Hunts also strengthened relationships. Nobles accompanied the king. Military officers participated, shared Danger created trust. Future alliances often developed during these expeditions rather than formal meetings. Persian princes also studied administration. Empires survive through paperwork as much as warfare. Taxes, road maintenance, agriculture, justice, construction, provincial governance, diplomacy. Every successful ruler required practical knowledge far beyond military skill. Imagine sitting beside experienced officials as they explain reports arriving from distant satrapies. Harvest estimates, trade revenues, local disputes, construction projects, military readiness. The empire generated constant information. Someone eventually needed to understand it. Often, that someone might become king. Art and culture occupied important places as well. Music, poetry, storytelling. Persian elites admired refinement. A prince should appreciate beautiful craftsmanship, recognize excellent literature, understand ceremony, speak elegantly. A ruler unable to participate in cultured conversation appeared incomplete. This balance between martial strength and intellectual cultivation distinguished Persian aristocratic ideals. One should command armies, but also appreciate beauty, build fortifications, yet also plant gardens, issue laws, yet listen to poets. Such contrasts appear repeatedly throughout Persian civilization. Now, imagine walking beyond the palace buildings into carefully designed gardens. Flowing water cools the warm air. Stone channels guide streams through geometric layouts. Trees provide shade. Flowers release fragrance. Birksong fils kiet kurnes. Persian gardens became so admired that the very word paradise ultimately traces back to an ancient Persian term describing enclosed royal gardens. These spaces represented more than luxury. They symbolized harmony, order imposed upon nature, life flourishing even within harsh climates. Water, always precious in much of Iran, became an expression of royal generosity. Engineers built sophisticated underground canals called qanats to carry water across astonishing distances. Without them, many gardens could never have existed. Visitors strolling beneath shaded pathways experienced not merely beauty, but engineering excellence. Persian civilization often hid remarkable technical achievement beneath elegant simplicity. Yet despite all this splendor, danger never remained far away. Every corridor echoed with politics. Every banquet included hidden calculations. Every friendship carried uncertainty, because succession inside the royal family followed no perfectly fixed rule. Any prince might someday become king, which meant every prince could also become someone else's rival. The magnificent palace therefore functioned as both home and battlefield. No swords needed to be drawn for conflict to exist. Ambition moved quietly. Whispers traveled through corridors. Servants overheard conversations. Nobles formed alliances. Mothers sought influence for their own sons. Court officials evaluated every shift in royal favor. Even children gradually became aware that smiles sometimes concealed calculation. One careless statement repeated before the wrong listener might eventually shape a career, or end one. For that reason, Persian princes learned caution almost as early as they learned reading. They observed before speaking, listened carefully, measured loyalty, remembered promises, because survival depended not only upon courage, but upon judgment. Visitors dazzled by Persepolis saw polished stone, glittering treasures, elaborate ceremonies, and graceful architecture. They rarely witnessed the invisible struggles unfolding behind palace walls. Yet those hidden struggles shaped the empire just as surely as victories won on distant battlefields. The princes growing up within these magnificent halls enjoyed opportunities beyond imagination. But they also carried burdens unlike those faced by ordinary people. Every privilege demanded vigilance. Every honor carried risk. Every celebration existed beneath the shadow of uncertainty. And as Persia continued expanding under new kings, those pressures would only grow stronger. Because the greater the empire became, the more valuable its throne, and the more dangerous the road leading toward it. From the outside, the life of a Persian prince appeared almost perfect. Magnificent palaces, servants attending to every need, rich clothing woven from the finest fabrics, jewelry crafted by the empire's greatest artisans, banquets filled with foods gathered from lands stretching from Egypt to Central Asia. To anyone looking from beyond the palace walls, it must have seemed like a life without hardship. The reality was very different. A Persian prince was never simply a child. From the moment he was born, expectations surrounded him. His future belonged not to himself, but to the empire. Every lesson, every conversation, every ceremony, every journey, every success, and every mistake prepared him for responsibilities that could one day affect millions of people spread across thousands of kilometers. Education began remarkably early. Ancient writers tell us that until about the age of 5, young princes remained largely under the care of their mothers and the women of the royal household. Those first years created emotional bonds, introduced family traditions, and surrounded children with stories about their ancestors. They heard the names of Cyrus, Cambyses, Darius. Heroes, kings, and great victories became familiar long before formal schooling began. But childhood ended quickly. Once formal education started, life became structured. Time was carefully organized. Teachers replaced playmates. Discipline replaced freedom. The palace itself became a classroom. The empire became the subject, and the future king became its student. Persian education aimed to produce something unusual. Not merely soldiers, not merely administrators, but rulers capable of leading one of the most diverse civilizations on Earth. That required far more than strength. The famous description preserved by the Greek historian Herodotus still captures the spirit of Persian education. He wrote that noble Persian boys learned 3 essential things: to ride well, to shoot accurately, and to speak the truth. Simple words, yet each carried layers of meaning. Learning to ride was about far more than transportation. Persia depended upon horses. Its cavalry formed one of the greatest military forces of the ancient world. Communication across the empire also relied upon mounted couriers. A prince uncomfortable on horseback would have appeared almost unfit for leadership. Imagine a young royal rising before dawn. The morning air still cool. Stable hands preparing horses. Experienced instructors already waiting. The prince mounts, not with effortless confidence at first, but through endless repetition. Falls happen. Mistakes happen. Fear appears. Yet each day the lessons continue. Balance improves. Control becomes instinct. Eventually horse and rider move almost as one. Long rides across rough terrain build endurance. Sharp turns teach precision. Galloping while maintaining perfect posture develops confidence. Later, these same abilities become indispensable during military campaigns. Archery demanded equal dedication. The Persian composite bow ranked among the finest weapons of its age. Built from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, it possessed remarkable power despite its relatively compact size. Using it effectively required patience, technique, strength, and constant practice. Targets stood at varying distances. Some remained still, others moved. Eventually, students practiced while riding, one of the most difficult military skills imaginable. Picture arrows flying across open training grounds. Instructors quietly correcting posture, adjusting grip, improving breathing, every movement repeated until it became automatic. No shortcuts existed. Excellence came only through discipline. The third lesson, speaking the truth, may seem unusual beside riding and archery. Yet within Persian culture, honesty possessed profound importance. Zoroastrian belief emphasized the struggle between truth and falsehood. Truth represented order, justice, harmony. Falsehood represented chaos, corruption, and destruction. A future king, therefore, had to understand that leadership depended not only upon force, but upon trust. Whether every Persian ruler always lived according to this ideal is another question. Politics has rarely rewarded complete honesty. Yet ideals shape cultures even when individuals sometimes fail to meet them. Princes constantly heard stories praising loyalty, integrity, and keeping one's word. Breaking an oath damaged not only reputation, but moral standing. Beyond these famous principles, education expanded into countless other subjects. History occupied a central place. A prince studied earlier reigns, victories, defeats, diplomatic agreements, rebellions, administrative reforms. He learned why Cyrus succeeded, why certain kings prospered, why others struggled. History became a collection of lessons rather than distant memories. Every ancestor offered either inspiration or warning. Genealogy mattered just as much. Royal families possessed complicated branches stretching across generations. Knowing precisely who was related to whom carried political significance. Marriage alliances, inheritance, military appointments, claims to the throne, all depended upon understanding family connections. A careless mistake regarding ancestry could create diplomatic embarrassment or political disaster. Religious instruction shaped daily life. Priests introduced young nobles to the teachings associated with Ahura Mazda, the supreme divine figure in Zoroastrian belief. Princes learned about moral responsibility, justice, purity, and the constant struggle between order and destructive chaos. Religion did not remain separate from government. It influenced how kings understood their duties. A ruler protected not only borders, but justice itself. Ceremonies became familiar through repetition. Sacred fires burned continuously. Prayers accompanied important occasions. Festivals marked the passing seasons. Royal children observed these traditions from their earliest memories. Language education reflected the empire's extraordinary diversity. Old Persian remained important for royal identity, but administration relied heavily upon Aramaic, the practical language connecting distant provinces. Diplomatic contact introduced additional languages, especially Greek during later generations. A prince able to understand multiple cultures possessed advantages impossible to ignore. Communication reduced misunderstanding. Knowledge created opportunity. Persia never consisted of one people alone. Its rulers governed Egyptians, Babylonians, Lydians, Phoenicians, Medes, Jews, Greeks, Armenians, Bactrians, and many more. Leadership required curiosity, not isolation. Mathematics and practical administration entered education as well. Taxes had to be calculated, construction measured, agricultural production estimated, military supplies recorded. Empire survived because someone understood numbers. Palaces, roads, bridges, and canals all depended upon careful planning. Behind every magnificent monument stood accountants, surveyors, engineers, and scribes. Princes needed enough knowledge to judge their work wisely. Music and poetry received equal respect. Persian courts valued refined conversation. A future king should recognize excellent literature, understand symbolism, appreciate artistic skill. Imagine an evening gathering within the palace. Musicians perform softly. Poets recite verses celebrating love, courage, wisdom, or the fleeting nature of life. Nobles discuss philosophy. Diplomats exchange ideas. The prince listens, sometimes participates, gradually learning that influence often comes through words rather than weapons. The image of ancient rulers as permanently engaged in warfare overlooks how much time successful governments spent discussing ideas, negotiating, planning, listening, thinking. Persian education reflected that broader reality. Physical training, nevertheless, remained relentless. Running, climbing, swimming where possible, wrestling, sword practice, spear throwing, shield work. Every muscle strengthened, every movement refined. The prince might someday command armies. His soldiers expected visible courage. No ruler could inspire confidence while shrinking from hardship. One particularly important activity combined many lessons at once. The royal hunt. Unlike ordinary hunting for food, these expeditions served as practical schools of leadership. Large groups traveled together. Officers, nobles, servants, scouts, handlers. The organization resembled military campaigns. Animals such as lions, wild boar, bears, and powerful wild cattle tested courage under genuine danger. Imagine the silence before the hunt begins. Dust rising beneath horses' hooves. The distant cry of birds. A signal passes through the riders. Then movement. Suddenly the stillness disappears. Horses surge forward. Archers raise bows. Dogs race ahead. Every participant must react instantly. No rehearsal exists. Only experience. Success depended upon coordination, judgment, and calm decision-making. Exactly the qualities required during war. Yet the hunt also strengthened friendships. Future generals rode beside future kings. Conversations around evening fires created trust impossible to manufacture later during crises. Political alliances often began not inside throne rooms, but during shared hardships outdoors. As princes matured, education became increasingly practical. Some received administrative responsibilities while still young adults. A province might be entrusted to them, not complete independence, but supervised authority. They learned how governors resolved disputes, collected taxes, managed irrigation, maintained roads, organized local defenses, listened to petitions, and balanced competing interests. Such experience proved invaluable. Reading reports inside a palace differed enormously from solving problems firsthand. One famous example appears in the life of Cyrus the Younger. Long before challenging his brother for the throne, he governed important Western territories. Those years provided military experience, political relationships, and confidence. Unfortunately, they also convinced him that he deserved supreme power. Education created capable leaders. It could also create ambitious rivals. That tension remained unavoidable. Persian princes also encountered foreigners throughout their lives. Delegations visited from distant kingdoms. Merchants arrived with unfamiliar goods. Scholars exchanged ideas. Ambassadors described lands beyond the empire's borders. Imagine hearing Egyptian priests explain ancient traditions, Greek philosophers discussing politics, Indian traders describing distant cities, Babylonian astronomers speaking about the heavens. Such encounters encouraged curiosity. The Persian court became one of the ancient world's great meeting places. Ideas traveled alongside luxury goods. No civilization develops in complete isolation. Persia certainly did not. It absorbed influences, adapted them, and contributed new ideas in return. Yet amid all this learning, another education unfolded quietly, one never officially listed among palace lessons. The education of survival. Children noticed who whispered when entering certain rooms, who avoided particular officials, who suddenly disappeared from court. They learned that smiles sometimes hid ambition, that generous gifts occasionally expected future favors, that loyalty could change with astonishing speed. A prince soon understood that every conversation might carry consequences. He learned when to speak, when to remain silent, whom to trust, and whom merely to respect from a distance. No teacher announced these lessons. Life itself provided them. Imagine attending a royal banquet. Music fills the hall. Golden vessels sparkle beneath torchlight. Everyone appears relaxed. Yet beneath the elegant surface, experienced nobles carefully observe one another. Who sits closest to the king? Who receives longer conversations? Who attracts admiration? Who leaves early? Power often reveals itself through small details. Young princes watched constantly, absorbing unwritten rules. Some became exceptionally skilled politicians. Others never mastered the subtle art of court life. History remembered both. The pressure remained immense. Unlike ordinary students, failure carried extraordinary consequences. An error in judgment might weaken an entire province. A military mistake could cost thousands of lives. Poor leadership invited rebellion. Weakness tempted ambitious relatives. Responsibility arrived long before adulthood. Even leisure reflected education. Games encouraged strategic thinking. Conversations sharpened memory. Ceremonies reinforced discipline. Nothing inside the palace existed without purpose. Gradually, year after year, the child transformed into a statesman, or at least into someone expected to become one. Not every prince succeeded. Some proved brilliant commanders. Others excelled at administration. Some inspired loyalty. Others inspired fear. A few never reached maturity at all. Disease, accidents, or political intrigue ended promising lives before they truly began. The education prepared princes for greatness, but it could never guarantee success. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why Persian history remains so compelling. Behind every celebrated king stood years of invisible preparation. Behind every military campaign stood decades of discipline training. Behind every political decision stood lessons learned during childhood. The magnificent empire did not rely upon chance alone. It invested enormous effort in shaping those who might someday guide its future. Even so, all the knowledge, discipline, and preparation in the world could not remove the greatest danger awaiting every Persian prince, because the greatest threat often lived under the very same roof, within the royal family itself. And nowhere did the splendor of Persia become more dangerous than inside its own palace walls. If the magnificent halls of Persepolis represented the public face of the Persian Empire, the private chambers hidden behind them told a very different story. Visitors arriving from distant provinces saw polished stone, towering columns, royal ceremonies, and perfect order. They admired the wealth. They admired the architecture. They admired the power. Almost none of them witnessed the quiet struggles unfolding behind closed doors. Because inside the palace, another kind of battle was always taking place. No armies marched. No trumpets sounded. No cavalry charged across open plains. Instead, conversations became weapons. Rumors became strategy. Friendships became alliances. And trust became one of the rarest things in the empire. The greatest prize in all of Persia was not gold. It was not land. It was not treasure. It was the throne. Whoever sat upon it ruled an empire stretching across mountains, deserts, rivers, forests, ports, and cities that few people could even imagine visiting during a single lifetime. To become king meant commanding vast armies, receiving tribute from dozens of nations, making decisions that affected millions. It also meant living with dangers unlike those faced by almost anyone else. Unlike many later monarchies, the Persian Empire did not always follow a perfectly fixed rule stating that the eldest son automatically inherited everything. Tradition certainly favored particular heirs, especially sons born after their father had become king. But the situation was rarely simple. A ruler might have several wives, many sons, different branches of the royal family, powerful noble supporters, influential relatives. Every succession, therefore, contained uncertainty. And uncertainty creates opportunity. Whenever opportunity appears around great power, ambition is never far behind. Imagine growing up with several brothers, playing together as children, learning from the same teachers, hunting side by side, sharing meals, laughing together. Now imagine gradually realizing that only one of you will eventually become king. Everything changes. Every achievement gains political meaning. Every friendship matters. Every military success attracts attention. Every compliment from the king becomes significant. The palace slowly transforms childhood companions into potential rivals. No one needs to say it aloud. Everyone understands. History offered repeated reminders of just how dangerous these rivalries could become. After the death of Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus the Great, confusion spread rapidly across the empire. Exactly what happened remains one of the great mysteries of Persian history. Ancient sources disagree. Some claim that Cambyses had secretly ordered the death of his own brother before leaving for Egypt. Others believed the brother survived. Still others argued that an impostor later claimed the prince's identity. What is certain is that a man eventually occupied the throne claiming royal legitimacy. His name appears in different forms depending upon the source. Some called him Bardia. Others referred to him as Smyrdes. King Darius later insisted this ruler had actually been an impostor named Gaumeda. According to Darius's version, Gaumeda merely resembled the dead prince and deceived the empire. Whether that account reflects complete truth remains impossible to prove. One important fact deserves remembering. Most surviving evidence comes from Darius himself. Victorious rulers naturally tell stories favorable to their own position. Darius claimed that he and a group of loyal nobles entered the palace, killed the false king, and restored legitimate rule. Perhaps that is exactly what happened. Perhaps events proved more complicated. History sometimes preserves certainty. At other times, it preserves only competing versions. Regardless, Darius became king and immediately faced an enormous challenge. Many regions refused to accept his authority. Rebellions erupted across the empire. Pretenders appeared claiming royal blood. Provincial leaders declared independence. The empire that Cyrus had united threatened to fracture. Darius responded with astonishing speed. Campaign after campaign restored Persian control. He defeated one rebellion after another, then ordered detailed accounts carved into the great rock relief at Behistun. That monument still survives today, standing high above an ancient road. Its inscriptions proclaim Darius's victories, his legitimacy, and the divine support he believed justified his rule. Whether one accepts every detail or not, the monument reveals something important. Control over history mattered almost as much as control over armies. Kings understood that future generations would judge them partly through the stories they left behind. Once Darius secured the throne, another challenge emerged. His own succession. He fathered numerous sons. Each possessed supporters. Each represented different family connections. Choosing an heir required balancing politics, tradition, and personal judgment. One candidate, Artabazanes, held an obvious advantage. He was Darius's oldest son, yet there was a complication. He had been born before Darius became king. Another son, Xerxes, possessed something different. His mother was Atossa, the daughter of Cyrus the Great himself. That connection carried extraordinary prestige. By selecting Xerxes, Darius strengthened the dynasty's link to its legendary founder. The decision disappointed others, but Darius remained powerful enough to enforce it. When he died, Xerxes inherited the empire without civil war. For the moment, stability prevailed, yet the underlying problem never disappeared. Future generations would face similar tensions, and not all transitions unfolded peacefully. Xerxes himself ruled one of the wealthiest empires on earth. His name became forever connected with the famous Persian invasion of Greece. Yet inside his own palace, dangers accumulated quietly. Eventually, the great king was assassinated. Exactly who organized the conspiracy remains debated. Ancient writers describe palace officials, members of the royal household, and ambitious courtiers becoming involved. Whatever the precise details, one fact remains clear. Even the King of Kings could not always trust those closest to him. His son, Artaxerxes I, succeeded to the throne. Almost immediately, another brother challenged his authority. Civil war threatened once again. Armies gathered, loyalty divided. The conflict ended with Artaxerxes victorious, his rival defeated. Another chapter in Persia's long history of dangerous succession. Perhaps no family conflict illustrates this pattern more dramatically than the rivalry between Artaxerxes II and his younger brother, Cyrus the Younger. Even today, historians consider their story one of antiquity's most compelling political dramas. Their father, Darius II, left behind an empire already facing significant difficulties. When he died, the older brother inherited the crown according to accepted custom. Artaxerxes became king, but the younger brother refused to accept remaining in the background. Cyrus possessed considerable advantages. Years earlier, he had received authority over important western provinces. He commanded experienced troops, maintained strong relationships with influential Persian nobles, and perhaps most importantly, he enjoyed the support of his mother, Queen Persepolis. Ancient writers describe her affection for Cyrus as unmistakable. Some even suggest she believed he should have inherited the throne instead, whether because of personal preference, political calculation, or genuine belief in his abilities. She consistently favored the younger son. Inside the palace, factions gradually formed. Some nobles supported the reigning king. Others quietly admired Cyrus. Still others attempted to remain neutral, waiting to see which side appeared stronger. That strategy often proved safest, until neutrality itself became impossible. Cyrus began preparing carefully. Open rebellion against the greatest empire in the world required enormous resources. He could not simply announce his intentions. Instead, he gathered forces gradually. One of his boldest decisions involved hiring thousands of Greek mercenaries, professional soldiers renowned throughout the Mediterranean for their discipline and battlefield effectiveness. Officially, many believe these troops were intended for local campaigns. Only later did their true destination become clear. The army marched eastward, across rivers, through valleys, across enormous distances. Eventually, everyone understood this was no provincial expedition. The younger prince intended to seize the Persian throne itself. Imagine the tension within the empire. Brother advancing against brother. Governors forced to choose sides. Families divided. Officers wondering whether today's ally might become tomorrow's enemy. Everything now depended upon a single battle. That battle took place near Babylon. At Cunaxa, ancient descriptions paint a vivid picture. Dust rising beneath thousands of marching soldiers. Banners fluttering above cavalry formations. Archers preparing volleys. Commands shouted in multiple languages. The empire itself seemed divided into two opposing worlds. The Greek mercenaries fighting for Cyrus performed exceptionally well. They drove back the troops facing them. Victory suddenly appeared possible, perhaps astonishingly close. Then everything changed. Cyrus spotted his brother across the battlefield. Instead of allowing the larger battle to unfold naturally, he made an extraordinary decision. Gathering a small group of loyal companions, he charged directly toward the king. Perhaps he believed killing Artaxerxes personally would end the conflict immediately. Perhaps he trusted his own courage. Perhaps ambition overcame caution. Whatever his reasoning, the moment became legendary. The prince reached astonishingly close to his brother. Some accounts even claim he wounded the king. Then, amid the confusion, Cyrus himself fell. Different ancient writers describe different circumstances. Some say a spear struck him. Others attribute the fatal wound to another weapon. But the outcome remained the same. The younger prince died upon the battlefield. His army immediately lost its purpose. Rebellions often survive defeat. Few survive the sudden death of the man they exist to support. Artaxerxes retained his throne. The rebellion collapsed. Yet the story did not end there. The Greek mercenaries, now stranded hundreds of kilometers from home, suddenly found themselves deep inside hostile territory. Their remarkable journey back toward the Black Sea later became one of antiquity's greatest survival stories. Recorded by Xenophon, it remains among the most valuable first-hand descriptions of the Persian world ever written. For Cyrus himself, history delivered a different verdict. Had he won, future generations might have celebrated him as the courageous prince who claimed his rightful inheritance. Because he lost, he became a warning about ambition. History often remembers success and failure very differently, even when courage appears on both sides. The palace continued producing similar tragedies. Princes accused one another of conspiracy. Heirs fell from favor. Executions followed allegations whose full truth can never be recovered. Sometimes genuine plots existed. Sometimes fear itself created imagined enemies. Power encourages suspicion. Suspicion encourages violence. Each generation repeated familiar patterns. Brothers watched brothers. Mothers defended sons. Nobles shifted allegiance. Royal advisors calculated every possibility. Among the most influential figures inside the palace were the queen mothers. Modern imagination often overlooks their political importance. Yet Persian royal women frequently exercised remarkable influence. They owned estates, controlled wealth, directed large households, corresponded with officials, supported appointments, and quietly shaped succession. A determined queen mother could alter the future of the empire without ever commanding an army. The palace also relied heavily upon eunuchs. These officials occupied unique positions within royal administration. Unable to establish hereditary dynasties of their own, they often earned extraordinary trust. Many supervised finances, royal chambers, communications, ceremonial arrangements, or confidential political matters. Because they controlled access to information, some eventually became among the most powerful individuals in the empire. Ancient writers occasionally blamed influential eunuchs for conspiracies, assassinations, and palace intrigues. Whether every accusation proves reliable remains uncertain. Powerful advisors throughout history often attract both admiration and suspicion. Inside the palace, Information itself became a form of power. Who entered the king's chamber? Who delivered reports first? Who interpreted foreign news? Who recommended appointments? Small advantages gradually accumulated into enormous influence. Experienced courtiers understood that controlling access to the ruler sometimes mattered more than commanding soldiers. For princes who failed to inherit the throne, life remained unpredictable. Some accepted governorships far from the capital. They governed provinces, led military expeditions, collected taxes, served the empire loyally. Others withdrew quietly from politics. A fortunate few enjoyed long lives. Others became perceived threats, and perceived threats rarely slept peacefully. One particularly harsh custom appears repeatedly within ancient sources. Blinding. Persian tradition generally considered physical perfection necessary for kingship. Removing a rival's eyesight therefore prevented future claims without immediate execution. To modern readers, the punishment appears horrifying. To ancient political calculation, it offered an alternative to outright killing. Mercy and cruelty existed side by side. The prince lived surrounded by astonishing privilege. Yet every privilege carried equal danger. The richest clothes, the finest horses, the grandest halls, none could guarantee tomorrow. Every morning began with possibility. Every evening ended with uncertainty. That constant tension shaped generations of Persian royalty. And it helps explain why stories inspired by Persia so often revolve around betrayal, hidden conspiracies, ambitious relatives, and dangerous palace secrets. The real history needed very little embellishment, because within those magnificent walls, the struggle for power could be every bit as dramatic as any legend ever imagined. For a Persian prince, education never ended inside classrooms or palace courtyards. Everything eventually led toward one unavoidable responsibility. Bah, not because the Persians sought conflict without reason, but because an empire stretching across 3 continents could not survive unless it possessed the strength to defend itself. Distance created opportunity for rebellion. Borders attracted ambitious neighbors. Trade routes required protection. Every generation inherited both the achievements of those before it and the responsibility to preserve them. That responsibility often rested upon young princes. By the time a royal son reached adulthood, he was expected to lead from the front. Persian kings rarely remained distant figures issuing commands from comfortable palaces. They appeared on campaigns, reviewed armies personally, hunted with officers, inspected fortifications, and when necessary, entered battle themselves. Courage was not simply admired. It was expected. Imagine the first time a young prince joins the royal army on campaign. The palace has disappeared behind distant mountains. The polished stone floors have given way to dusty roads. Instead of musicians and court officials, the air is filled with marching feet, horses, wagons, and the constant sound of soldiers preparing for another day. Thousands of people move together with remarkable organization. Blacksmiths repair damaged equipment. Cooks prepare meals over open fires. Scribes record supplies. Messengers arrive, carrying reports from scouts. Engineers examine bridges and rivers ahead. Everything functions like an enormous living machine. An ancient army was far more than warriors carrying weapons. It was an entire traveling society. Food had to arrive every day. Animals required water. Medical care, limited though it was, still needed organization. Weapons demanded maintenance. Roads sometimes had to be repaired before wagons could continue. Victory often depended as much upon logistics as courage. The Persian Empire became exceptionally skilled at solving these problems. One reason lay in its remarkable road system. Perhaps the most famous was the Royal Road, stretching for well over 2,000 kilometers. It connected major cities across the empire. Stations along the route allowed royal messengers to change horses rapidly. Fresh riders waited. Fresh animals waited. Messages traveled with astonishing speed for the ancient world. Centuries later, Greek historians still admired the efficiency of this communication network. One famous observation described how neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness prevented the king's couriers from completing their journeys. The phrase became so admired that later postal systems echoed its spirit. Efficient communication allowed Persian kings to govern lands impossible for earlier empires to control effectively. Orders reached distant governors. Warnings traveled quickly. Military reinforcements could be coordinated across enormous distances. Without roads, Persia could never have remained united. The army itself reflected the empire's diversity. Unlike kingdoms relying almost entirely upon one people, Persia drew strength from many nations. Imagine standing beside a Persian battlefield shortly before combat begins. You would hear numerous languages, see astonishingly varied clothing, notice different styles of armor, helmets and weapons. There are Persian nobles wearing elegant robes beneath scale armor, Median cavalry beside them, Egyptian troops carrying equipment familiar along the Nile, Phoenician sailors serving within the imperial fleet, archers from distant eastern provinces, horsemen from Central Asia, Indian contingents, Armenian cavalry, Babylonian infantry. The empire did not erase local traditions. Instead, it organized them into one military system. That diversity became both a strength and a challenge. Each region contributed its own expertise. Mountain peoples fought differently from desert riders. River civilizations possessed engineering knowledge. Nomadic horsemen mastered mobility. The Persians understood how to combine these abilities. Yet coordinating such variety required exceptional leadership. Orders sometimes needed translation. Different military customs required adaptation. Successful commanders learned flexibility. Among all Persian military formations, none became more famous than the Immortals. Ancient writers gave them this unforgettable name because the unit supposedly always contained exactly 10,000 soldiers. Whenever one man died, became ill, or left service, another immediately filled the vacancy. To outside observers, their numbers never changed. It appeared almost as though the force could never diminish. Hence, the Immortals. Whether their organization always functioned exactly this way remains debated. But there is little doubt they represented one of the Empire's elite military formations. Imagine watching them march. Uniform appearance, disciplined movement, rows perfectly aligned, sunlight reflecting from polished spear points, richly decorated clothing revealing their special status. Unlike ordinary soldiers, these men served both as royal guards and frontline troops. Protecting the king required absolute loyalty. Their equipment balanced protection with mobility. Instead of enormous bronze armor like many Greek hoplites wore, Persian soldiers often favored lighter scale armor. Small overlapping metal plates sewn on a leather or fabric. Flexible enough for movement. Strong enough to stop many attacks. Their shields differed as well. Many carried large wicker shields strengthened with leather. Lighter than heavy Greek shields. Better suited to Persian tactics, emphasizing mobility. The Persian composite bow remained one of the army's greatest advantages. Its construction required remarkable craftsmanship. Layers of different materials worked together, creating extraordinary power from a relatively compact weapon. A trained archer could send arrows over impressive distances, long before enemy infantry closed for hand-to-hand combat. Persian volleys filled the sky. Imagine thousands of arrows released together. The sound alone would have been unforgettable. A rushing whisper becoming a storm overhead. Then impact. Shields raised. Armor struck. Formation disrupted. Psychological pressure often proved almost as important as physical casualties. Archery shaped Persian strategy, but cavalry truly defined Persian military identity. The Iranian plateau encouraged horsemanship. Generations grew up riding. Mounted warriors moved rapidly across open terrain. Arrast ennemi formation. Protected vulnerable flanks, pursued retreating forces, or screened the advance of larger armies. A Persian prince, therefore, spent countless hours perfecting mounted combat. Picture him galloping across open fields, drawing a bow while controlling his horse with practiced precision, releasing arrows without slowing, turning sharply, repeating the movement again and again until every action became instinct. This level of coordination demanded years of training. It cannot be improvised during war. Spears remained equally important. Infantry formations depended upon disciplined ranks. Long weapons allowed soldiers to engage opponents before swords ever reached striking distance. Persian spears differed somewhat from the famous Macedonian sarissas introduced later by Philip II and Alexander. Yet they remained effective when properly coordinated. Swords served as secondary weapons, useful once formations closed. Persian blades, often called akinaki, were generally shorter than many later swords. Designed primarily for thrusting rather than broad, slashing movements. Elegant, practical, and deadly in close quarters, a prince learned each weapon thoroughly, not because he would necessarily use every one equally in battle, but because understanding weapons meant understanding the soldiers who carried them. Leadership required experience. One aspect of Persian military culture often surprises modern audiences. Honor mater dipli. Ancient warfare could certainly be brutal. Cities fell. People died. Empires expanded through force. Yet Persian noble ideals praised courage, loyalty, keeping one's promises, showing respect toward worthy opponents. Cowardice damaged reputation. Bravery elevated it. This did not prevent strategic deception. Persian commanders employed intelligence gathering, diplomacy, surprise, and careful planning whenever useful. They understood that winning mattered. Still, cultural ideals encouraged rulers to behave with dignity. The royal hunt continued reinforcing these values. Imagine pursuing a lion across rough ground. Every participant depends upon everyone else. One mistake may prove fatal. No one wants glory purchased through another man's unnecessary death. The hunt teaches cooperation as much as individual skill. Military campaigns also exposed princes to hardship. Despite their noble birth, they marched through heat, crossed rivers, endured storms, camped beneath open skies. Ancient armies rarely enjoyed comfort. Even kings experienced dust, exhaustion, and uncertainty. The image of rulers spending every campaign surrounded by luxury exaggerates reality. Successful commanders shared enough hardship to earn respect. Persian armies also excelled at engineering. Bridges crossed rivers. Siege equipment approached fortified cities. Supply routes remained operational through difficult landscapes. Conquest depended upon practical knowledge, not merely battlefield heroics. Consider the challenge of feeding tens of thousands of soldiers. Grain, livestock, water, firewood, animal fodder. Every day's delay increased pressure. An army unable to eat soon ceased to exist. Logistics, therefore, became one of the empire's greatest hidden strengths. Many victories occurred because Persian administration functioned efficiently long before battle began. When later Greek writers described Persian armies, they sometimes emphasized enormous numbers. Modern historians treat many of those figures cautiously. Ancient authors frequently exaggerated. Still, there is little doubt Persia possessed the ability to mobilize forces larger than most neighboring kingdoms. Its immense territory allowed access to extraordinary manpower. Yet size alone never guaranteed victory. Large armies required coordination, leadership, clear communication, strong morale. Without those qualities, numbers could become a burden rather than an advantage. Persian commanders understood this well. Training, therefore, remained continuous. Drills, inspections, exercises. The army represented a permanent institution rather than a temporary gathering of warriors. For princes, every campaign served as another classroom. Older generals explained terrain, river crossings, formation changes, negotiation with local leaders, managing exhausted troops, recognizing enemy weaknesses. No book could replace lived experience. Imagine riding beside an experienced commander at sunset after a long day's march. He points toward distant hills, explains why camps should never be placed carelessly, why water sources matter, why narrow valleys create danger. These conversations shaped future kings, perhaps more than any formal lesson inside the palace. Now compare this historical reality with the prince familiar for modern games. The fictional hero races across collapsing bridges, runs along vertical walls, leap impossible distance, defeats dozens of opponents in breathtaking sword fights. Clearly, no ancient warrior possessed supernatural athletic abilities. Yet beneath the fantasy lies an important truth. Real Persian princes genuinely belonged among the best trained warriors of their age. They began preparing in childhood, mastered riding, archery, weapons, endurance, leadership. They hunted dangerous animals, led armies, and often fought personally during campaigns. The games exaggerate those abilities into spectacular acrobatics. But the foundation rests upon authentic historical expectations. Even the palace architecture contributes to that impression. Persepolis contained staircases, terraces, courtyards, elevated walkways, and countless architectural features that stimulate modern imagination. No prince actually sprinted across walls, yet the monumental spaces themselves inspire adventure. Centuries after the empire disappeared, those ruins continue encouraging visitors to picture life within them. And perhaps that is why the Prince of Persia remains such a compelling idea, because the real civilization behind the legend was already extraordinary. It needed very little invention to capture the imagination. The greatest dangers facing a Persian prince, however, did not always appear on distant battlefields. Sometimes they waited much closer to home, hidden behind smiles, whispers, and the elegant ceremonies of court. When people think about ancient empires, they often imagine armies first. Lines of soldiers, marching banners, victorious kings, great battles that decided the fate of nations. Those things certainly mattered in Persia. No empire of such enormous size could have existed without military strength. But if we judged Persia only by its conquests, we would miss something equally important. The people who built this empire were not satisfied with simply ruling vast territories. They also wanted to create beauty. They believed power should be surrounded by elegance. That greatness was measured not only by the lands a king conquered, but by the world he created within those lands. Perhaps nowhere does that idea become clearer than in the Persian garden. Today, gardens may seem like pleasant places to relax. In ancient Persia, they represented something much deeper. To understand them, imagine standing on the edge of a dry landscape. The sun hangs high overhead. The earth appears harsh. Water is precious. Trees are scattered. Then suddenly a high wall appears. Beyond its gates lies another world entirely. Cool air replaces the heat. Streams of clear water flow through carefully cut channels. Tall cypress trees cast long shadows across stone paths. Fruit trees bend beneath the weight of pomegranates, figs, and grapes. Flowers fill the air with fragrance. Birdsong echoes from every direction. The noise of the outside world seems to disappear. For someone entering such a place, the experience must have felt almost miraculous. These enclosed gardens became one of Persia's greatest cultural achievements. In fact, the very word paradise traces its origins to an ancient Persian expression describing a walled garden. Long before paradise became associated with heaven, it described these carefully designed spaces where nature and human craftsmanship existed in perfect balance. Nothing inside the garden happened by chance. The layout followed precise geometric patterns. Straight channels divided the grounds into harmonious sections. Water flowed through narrow stone courses before gathering in clear pools that reflected the sky. Every tree occupied a deliberate position. Every flower contributed color at the appropriate season. Every pathway guided visitors through changing views. Persian gardeners were not simply planting trees. They were designing an experience. Water formed the heart of everything. That may seem obvious today, but within much of the Iranian plateau, securing fresh water required remarkable engineering. The Persians developed underground channels called qanats. Some stretched for astonishing distances beneath the earth, carrying cool groundwater from mountain regions toward farms, villages, and royal estates. Without these hidden systems, many gardens could never have existed. Imagine the skill required. Generations of engineers calculated gentle slopes with extraordinary precision. Too steep, and water would rush uncontrollably. Too shallow, and it would never reach its destination. Working without modern machinery, they created hydraulic systems that remained in use for centuries. Visitors rarely noticed the engineering. They simply admired the peaceful streams. That quiet elegance reflected something deeply Persian. The greatest achievements often appeared effortless. Within the gardens, pavilions offered shaded places for conversation. Kings met ambassadors there. Nobles discussed politics. Poets recited verses. Musicians performed softly while fountains provided a constant background of flowing water. Important decisions affecting distant provinces might begin beneath flowering trees rather than inside formal audience halls. The environment itself encouraged calm reflection. Persian rulers understood that surroundings influenced thought. Beauty possessed practical value. The gardens also expressed philosophical ideas. Order emerging from nature. Life flourishing where harsh conditions once existed. Harmony replacing disorder. These concepts echoed wider Persian beliefs about good governance. A successful king should bring stability, justice, prosperity, just as a skilled gardener transformed dry ground into living beauty. Walking through such spaces, one encountered carefully chosen trees. The tall cypress became especially admired. Its evergreen branches symbolized endurance. Fruit trees served practical and symbolic purposes alike. Their harvest fed households while reminding visitors that wise leadership should produce abundance. Flowers introduced changing colors throughout the seasons. Roses, lilies, jasmine, and countless other varieties filled the air with perfume. The Persians appreciated beauty through every sense, not only sight, but fragrance, sound, touch, and taste. Fresh fruit could be picked directly from branches. Water could be heard before it appeared. Cool shade offered relief from intense summer heat. It was an environment designed for complete human experience. Persian appreciation for beauty extended far beyond gardens. Their craftsmen achieved extraordinary mastery in stone carving, metalworking, jewelry, woodworking, ceramics, and textiles. Imagine entering one of the royal workshops. The steady rhythm of chisels striking limestone echoes through large halls. Nearby, goldsmiths shape delicate ornaments. Stone cutters polish precious gems. Carpet weavers patiently knot thousands upon thousands of threads. Each artisan spends years mastering specialized techniques. Many begin as apprentices while still children, learning directly from older masters. Skills pass from one generation to the next, not through books alone, but through observation, practice, and patience. The relief sculptures decorating Persepolis remain among the finest surviving examples of Persian artistic achievement. Walk beside them slowly. Notice how every beard receives careful attention. Every fold of clothing follows natural movement. Every face differs slightly from the next. Representatives from dozens of nations appear not as identical figures, but as individuals. Artists studied details carefully. Different hats, different hairstyles, different gifts, different expressions. The carvings become almost like a visual encyclopedia of the empire itself. Even after centuries of weathering, their precision continues to impress archaeologists and visitors alike. Persian metalworkers created objects that astonished foreign travelers. Golden drinking vessels shaped like lions, silver bowls decorated with mythical creatures, elegant bracelets, necklaces, ceremonial weapons whose craftsmanship transformed practical tools into works of art. Many pieces combined influences gathered from across the empire. Egyptian forms, Mesopotamian technique, Anatolian traditions. Persian artists rarely copied directly. Instead, they blended ideas into something uniquely their own. Textiles represented another source of pride. Fine fabrics traveled enormous distances along ancient trade routes. Royal clothing reflected both wealth and remarkable craftsmanship. Embroidery shimmered with gold thread. Patterns displayed geometric balance alongside natural motifs. Colors came from carefully prepared dyes requiring specialized knowledge. Producing luxury textiles demanded countless hours of labor, yet they remained essential symbols of status throughout the empire. Carpets deserve particular attention, although surviving examples from the Achaemenid period are extremely rare. Later Persian carpet traditions almost certainly developed from much older foundations. Creating one large carpet required extraordinary dedication. Every knot tied by hand, every pattern carefully planned. Weeks became months. Months sometimes became years. The finished result could outlive its maker. Centuries later, Persian carpets would become famous around the world, their reputation resting upon traditions rooted deep in antiquity. Architecture reflected similar ambition. Persian builders combined influences gathered across many cultures while creating structures unlike those found anywhere else. Columns soared high above courtyards. Stone staircases invited slow, ceremonial processions. Open spaces allowed light to transform interiors throughout the day, rather than enclosing everything behind thick walls. Persian architecture often celebrated openness. Courtyards connected different parts of palace life. Water reflected buildings. Gardens softened stone. Nature and architecture worked together rather than competing. Imagine sunrise at Persepolis. The first light touches the upper capitals of towering columns. Gradually shadows retreat across the terraces. Carved reliefs begin glowing with warm color. Birds gather among nearby gardens. Servants quietly prepare the palace for another day. The entire complex seems to awaken with the sun itself. Hours later, afternoon light creates completely different scenes. By evening, long shadows stretch across the stone. Everything changes without the buildings themselves ever moving. The architects understood light as carefully as they understood stone. Persian cities beyond the royal capitals also displayed thoughtful planning. Markets brought merchants together from distant lands. Storage buildings protected grain. Roads connected neighborhoods efficiently. Religious buildings served local communities. Public spaces encouraged commerce and conversation. Life inside the empire depended upon organization as much as monumental architecture. The Persians also valued literature. Though much of their earliest writing has not survived, storytelling occupied an important place within elite culture. Poetry, genealogies, historical traditions, religious hymns, all helped preserve memory across generations. A prince was expected not only to appreciate military victories, but to recognize wisdom expressed through language. Music accompanied many aspects of life: ceremonies, banquets, religious observances, festivals. Professional musicians developed sophisticated traditions using instruments familiar throughout the ancient Near East. The sound of stringed instruments, drums, wind instruments, and singers would have echoed through palace halls during important celebrations. Foreign visitors often remarked upon Persian luxury. Some admired it, others criticized it. Greek writers in particular sometimes contrasted Persian refinement with what they considered Greek simplicity. Yet even those critics frequently acknowledged the astonishing wealth and artistic accomplishment surrounding the Persian court. Luxury could certainly become excessive. Ancient authors occasionally warned that comfort weakened discipline. Still, reducing Persian civilization to stereotypes about extravagance misses the deeper picture. These achievements reflected organization, engineering, trade, agriculture, skilled craftsmanship, and generations of accumulated knowledge. The empire's beauty did not appear by accident. It required countless workers: architects, artists, gardeners, engineers, laborers, administrators, merchants, and patrons willing to support their efforts. Every magnificent palace represented years of coordinated labor. Every flourishing garden depended upon hidden systems supplying water. Every carved relief reflected thousands of careful blows from skilled hands. Perhaps this explains why Persia continued inspiring artists long after its political empire disappeared. Beauty survives in ways conquest often cannot. Cities may fall, dynasties may vanish, yet ideas about architecture, gardens, decoration, and artistic harmony continue traveling across centuries. The image of the Persian garden influenced later Islamic architecture, royal parks across Asia, even European landscape design absorbed distant echoes of these ancient traditions. When modern audiences explore Persian-inspired worlds in stories or games, they often respond instinctively to that beauty. Flowing water, sunlit courtyards, graceful arches, rich colors, elegant patterns. These elements carry emotional power because they originated within a civilization that believed beauty itself formed part of good government. For a Persian prince, growing up surrounded by such splendor offered constant reminders of what the empire sought to protect: the gardens, the cities, the art, the traditions. These were not merely decorations surrounding power. They were among the greatest reasons the empire existed at all. Yet beneath every peaceful garden, beneath every quiet courtyard, and behind every magnificent work of art, another force continued shaping Persian life. A belief system that explained the struggle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness, and humanity's place within the universe itself. To understand ancient Persia completely, we must look beyond its armies, its palaces, and its kings. Every civilization is built upon ideas. Ideas about justice, about the meaning of life, about what makes a ruler worthy, about the difference between right and wrong. For the Persians, those ideas were deeply connected to one of the world's oldest surviving religions, Zoroastrianism. Long before the rise of Christianity, long before Islam, even before many of the traditions that would later dominate the Middle East. The teachings associated with the prophet Zarathustra, known to the Greeks as Zoroaster, had already begun shaping Persian thought. Exactly when Zarathustra lived remains uncertain. Historians continue debating the dates. Some place him many centuries before the Persian Empire, others somewhat later. The surviving evidence leaves room for discussion. But regardless of the exact timeline, by the time the Achaemenid kings ruled their vast empire, many of the principles associated with his teachings had become closely connected with Persian royal ideology. Imagine a world where every decision, no matter how small, carries cosmic significance, where speaking honestly strengthens the forces of order, where lying helps chaos spread, where every act of kindness, every promise kept, every fair judgment contributes to a struggle far greater than any individual life. That was one of the central ideas within Zoroastrian belief. At the heart of the religion stood Ahura Mazda, often translated as the wise Lord, the supreme divine being associated with wisdom, truth, justice, and the ordered creation of the universe. Persian kings frequently invoked Ahura Mazda in their inscriptions, not merely as a symbolic figure, but as the divine source from whom legitimate kingship ultimately flowed. When Darius ordered his achievements carved in a stone at Behistun, he repeatedly declared that Ahura Mazda had granted him the kingdom. To modern readers, such statements may sound like political propaganda. Certainly, they reinforced royal authority. But in the ancient world, religion and government were rarely separate. Most rulers genuinely understood their authority through spiritual ideas. To govern well meant fulfilling sacred responsibility. Opposing Ahura Mazda was the destructive force known as Ungramenu, later called Ahriman. Rather than existing as an equal opposite, he represented corruption, falsehood, violence, disease, chaos, everything that sought to damage the good order of creation. Human life, therefore, unfolded within an ongoing struggle, not simply between rival nations, but between truth and deception, construction and destruction, justice and injustice. One remarkable aspect of Zoroastrian teaching was its emphasis on human choice. People were not viewed merely as helpless observers. Every individual possessed the ability to choose. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. These three principles became famous expressions of Zoroastrian ethics. Simple enough to remember, profound enough to shape an entire civilization. Imagine a young Persian prince hearing these ideas from childhood. Every lesson in honesty suddenly carries greater meaning. Keeping a promise is no longer merely polite behavior. It becomes participation in maintaining the very order of the universe. Speaking falsely does more than damage reputation. It strengthens chaos itself. Whether every prince always lived according to these ideals is another matter. History shows us many rulers who failed their own standards. Yet ideals matter because they establish expectations. They shape how societies judge success and failure. Fire occupied a special place within Zoroastrian worship, not because fire itself was considered a god, but because it symbolized purity, light, and truth. Sacred flames burned continuously inside temples. Priests cared for them with extraordinary attention. Imagine entering one of these sanctuaries, The atmosphere is quiet. The air carries the scent of clean burning wood. At the center, the sacred fire glows steadily, its light reflecting from polished surfaces, its warmth filling the chamber. No elaborate statues dominate the room. Instead, the living flame becomes the visual reminder of divine order. For ancient Persians, fire represented something impossible to ignore. It illuminated darkness, provided warmth, allowed food to be prepared, protected against danger. Its symbolism naturally connected with wisdom and purity. Water also held sacred significance, as did the earth. Because these elements supported life, they deserved protection from pollution. This belief even influenced burial customs. Unlike many neighboring civilizations, traditional Zoroastrian practice generally avoided burying bodies directly in the ground or burning them. Both actions risked contaminating sacred elements. Instead, the deceased were often placed in elevated structures known much later as towers of silence. There, nature completed the process. Afterward, only clean bones remained. To modern audiences, such customs may seem unfamiliar, perhaps even unsettling. Yet every culture develops practices reflecting its understanding of life, death, and the natural world. Within the Zoroastrian worldview, preserving the purity of creation carried immense importance. Priests, known to Greek writers as the Magi, occupied respected positions within Persian society. They preserved religious traditions, conducted ceremonies, interpreted sacred teachings, advised rulers, and ensured important rituals continued correctly. Over time, the word Magi entered many languages, eventually becoming associated with wise men, scholars, and learned religious figures. For Persian kings, maintaining a positive relationship with the priesthood reinforced both religious and political stability. The moral universe described by Zoroastrianism extended beyond death. According to later traditions, every soul eventually faced judgment. After death, one crossed the Chinvat Bridge. For those who had lived truthfully, the crossing became wide and safe, leading toward paradise. For those who embraced falsehood and cruelty, the bridge narrowed, leading instead toward punishment. This concept influenced later religious traditions throughout the Near East. Ideas about judgment, heaven, hell, resurrection, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil would echo through centuries of theological development. Many scholars continue studying the ways these ancient Persian beliefs interacted with neighboring religions. The connections are complex, sometimes direct, sometimes indirect, but Persia's influence upon religious history is difficult to overstate. Perhaps the most hopeful element within Zoroastrian teaching concerned the future. History was not viewed as endless repetition. Eventually, according to tradition, good would triumph completely. The world would be renewed, justice restored, krizi schön healed. The struggle against evil would not continue forever. It possessed an ending, a destination. This hopeful vision gave meaning to present difficulties. No matter how dark circumstances appeared, truth ultimately remained stronger. For Persian rulers, these beliefs carried political consequences. A king should protect justice, punish corruption, reward honesty, defend the weak, maintain order. Failure to govern fairly represented more than administrative incompetence. It became moral failure. Royal inscriptions repeatedly described kings defeating the lie. Modern historians understand this language, both politically and religiously. Rebels challenged royal authority, but they also represented disorder, threatening the proper structure of the empire. Naturally, reality proved more complicated. Kings remained human. Some governed wisely, others harshly. Court politics still involved deception. Wars still brought suffering. No civilization perfectly embodies its highest ideals. Yet understanding those ideals helps us understand how Persians viewed themselves. One particularly interesting feature of the empire was its relative religious tolerance. Persia ruled peoples following many different beliefs. Egyptians worshipped ancient gods along the Nile. Babylonians honored Marduk. Jewish communities maintained their own religious traditions. Greek cities followed their own pantheon. Rather than attempting to eliminate these practices, Persian rulers generally allowed local worship to continue, provided loyalty to imperial authority remained intact. This policy proved remarkably practical. An empire stretching across thousands of kilometers could not function efficiently if every conquered population resisted religious persecution. Respecting local traditions reduced conflict, encouraged cooperation, and strengthened long-term stability. Cyrus the Great became especially remembered for this approach. His decision to allow exiled Jewish communities to return home after the Babylonian captivity remains one of the best-known examples. Later generations praised him not only as a conqueror, but as a ruler willing to respect the identities of those under his authority. This does not mean the Persian Empire resembled modern ideas about religious freedom. It remained an ancient imperial state. Political loyalty always came first, yet compared with many neighboring powers, Persian policy often displayed remarkable flexibility. The influence of Zoroastrian ethics also reached everyday behavior. Keeping contracts mattered. Hospitality toward guests earned respect. Agriculture became more than economic activity. Cultivating land represented participation in improving creation, caring for useful animals, maintaining cleanliness, protecting water sources, all reflected broader moral responsibilities. Imagine once again a young prince walking through the palace gardens. His teachers explain not only the names of flowers and trees, but why tending them matters. Order replacing neglect, growth replacing barrenness, human effort cooperating with creation rather than destroying it. Even the gardens become lessons in philosophy. Over the centuries, Persia changed. Empires rose. Empires fell. Alexander conquered the Achaemenids. Later dynasties ruled. Eventually Islam spread across Iran. Yet Zoroastrian ideas never disappeared entirely. Many concepts survived through literature, culture, language, and memory. Small Zoroastrian communities continue practicing the faith today, particularly among the Parsis of India and communities within Iran itself. Though far smaller than in antiquity, they preserve traditions reaching back thousands of years. When modern audiences encounter stories inspired by Persia, they often notice recurring themes: light opposing darkness, order resisting chaos, heroes making moral choices, the struggle between corruption and justice. These ideas appear repeatedly, not because every story intentionally teaches Zoroastrian theology, but because they grew from a civilization shaped by those ancient beliefs. Even fictional adventures carry distant echoes of real philosophy. The Prince of Persia may wield magical weapons in legend, but the real princes of ancient Persia carried something equally significant, a belief that leadership required more than strength, that every ruler stood accountable not only before history, but before a moral order greater than any empire. It was an ideal difficult to achieve, sometimes impossible, yet it remained one of the foundations upon which Persian civilization understood itself. And while those beliefs guided kings through times of peace and prosperity, a far greater challenge eventually approached from the west. A young Macedonian commander whose ambition would bring one of history's greatest empires to its final test. Every empire, no matter how powerful, eventually reaches a moment when its future hangs in the balance. For more than 2 centuries, the Persian Empire had appeared almost unstoppable. Its roads connected distant provinces. Its governors administered lands stretching from Egypt to Central Asia. Its armies defended frontiers thousands of kilometers apart. Its palaces symbolized stability. Its kings carried the title, King of Kings. To many people living at the time, Persia must have seemed permanent. Generations have been born under Persian rule. Entire cities knew no other master. The empire had survived rebellions, border wars, succession disputes, and foreign invasions. Each challenge had been overcome. Each crisis had passed. Yet history has a way of changing suddenly. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin with one individual, one unexpected decision, one campaign, far to the northwest, beyond the mountains and the Aegean Sea. Another kingdom had been quietly changing. For centuries, the Greek city-states had often viewed Macedonia as a rough northern neighbor. Its people spoke a form of Greek. Its kings claimed heroic ancestry. Yet many southern Greeks considered them outsiders. That perception changed dramatically during the reign of Philip II. Philip transformed Macedonia into one of the most disciplined military powers of the ancient world. He reorganized the army, introduced new tactics, strengthened cavalry, and forged political alliances that gradually brought much of Greece under his influence. His greatest dream, however, extended beyond Greece. For generations, memories of the Persian invasions under Darius and Xerxes had remained alive. Philip envisioned leading a united Greek campaign into Asia. Before he could begin, he was assassinated. His son inherited both the throne and the ambition. That son was Alexander, only 20 years old, already experienced in warfare, exceptionally intelligent, educated by Aristotle, confident almost beyond measure. Alexander possessed something difficult to define. Many successful commanders understood strategy. Many kings displayed courage. Few combined military brilliance, personal charisma, relentless determination, and absolute belief in their own destiny as completely as Alexander did. He crossed into Asia Minor in 334 BCE. His army was surprisingly small compared with the enormous resources available to Persia, roughly 40,000 soldiers, against an empire capable of mobilizing far larger numbers. At first glance, the outcome seemed obvious, yet numbers alone rarely decide history. Alexander's army moved with remarkable speed. Its officers were experienced, its soldiers intensely disciplined. Most importantly, its commander excelled at making rapid decisions under enormous pressure. The first major confrontation came near the Granicus River. Persian commanders gathered forces to block the invasion. The battle proved fierce. Ancient sources describe Alexander personally leading cavalry across the river despite considerable danger. The fighting was intense, but by day's end, the Macedonians had secured victory. The result carried significance beyond the battlefield. Western Asia Minor now lay open. Some cities resisted, others surrendered. Momentum began shifting. Word spread quickly. This young king from Macedonia had defeated Persian forces. The empire could no longer dismiss him as a minor threat. Far to the east, King Darius III prepared his response. Unlike earlier kings such as Cyrus or Darius the Great, Darius III inherited an empire already weakened by internal difficulties. Several succession crises had damaged royal authority. Influential nobles possessed growing independence. Court politics had become increasingly unstable. He was not an incompetent ruler. Many historians consider him capable and determined. But circumstances favored neither him, nor the empire he now struggled to defend. Eventually, the two kings met near Issus. The battlefield itself shaped events. Instead of wide open plains where Persian numbers could fully deploy, the terrain narrowed between mountains and sea. Large sections of the Persian army struggled to maneuver effectively. Alexander recognized the opportunity immediately, leading his elite cavalry. He struck directly toward the Persian center, toward the king himself. In ancient warfare, the ruler's presence mattered enormously. Soldiers looked toward him for confidence. If the king remained firm, armies often continued fighting. If the king fled, panic could spread with astonishing speed. Exactly that happened. Darius withdrew from the battlefield, whether from immediate danger, confusion, or the belief that survival offered the only chance to continue resistance. The effect proved devastating. Many Persian troops interpreted the king's departure as defeat. Organization collapsed. Retreat became disorder. Alexander won another extraordinary victory. Among those captured afterward were members of the Persian royal family. Darius's mother, his wife, his daughters. Ancient writers note something that surprised many contemporaries. Alexander treated them with respect. He neither humiliated nor harmed them. Partly, this reflected genuine admiration for royal dignity. Partly, it served political purposes. If Alexander wished eventually to rule Persia, he needed Persians to view him as more than a destroyer. He wanted legitimacy, not simply conquest. After Issus, many expected Alexander to pursue Darius immediately. Instead, he turned south. This decision reveals remarkable strategic patience. Before advancing deep into the empire, he first secured the eastern Mediterranean, Phoenician ports, naval bases, trade routes. Without those objectives, Persian fleets might threaten his supply lines. One city, Tyre, refused surrender, built upon an island, protected by formidable walls. It appeared almost impossible to capture. Alexander refused to bypass it. His engineers began constructing an enormous causeway across the sea itself. Stone by stone, day after day, the island gradually became connected to the mainland. Months passed. The siege finally succeeded. It demonstrated Alexander's determination. No obstacle remained permanent. Only another problem waiting for a solution. From there, he entered Egypt. Unlike many previous conquerors, Alexander encountered relatively little resistance. Many Egyptians welcomed the end of Persian rule. He founded a new city, Alexandria, a city destined to become one of history's greatest centers of learning. While in Egypt, Alexander visited the famous oracle at Siwa. Ancient sources disagree about exactly what occurred. Whatever happened, Alexander afterward appeared even more convinced that extraordinary destiny awaited him. Meanwhile, Darius attempted negotiation. Ancient accounts preserve remarkable offers. Territory, wealth, even marriage alliances, provided Alexander agreed to end the invasion. One famous story claims Alexander's General Parmenion remarked, "If I were Alexander, I would accept." Alexander supposedly replied, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." Whether every word is authentic hardly matters. The story captures his ambition perfectly. He no longer sought compromise. He intended to claim the entire empire. The decisive confrontation finally arrived at Gaugamela. In 331 BC, unlike Issus, this battlefield favored Persian numbers. The ground had even been prepared to allow easier movement for cavalry and chariots. Darius assembled forces from across the empire. Cavalry, infantry, scythe chariots, even a small number of war elephants. Everything now depended upon one battle. Imagine dawn breaking across the plain, dust already hanging in the air, thousands upon thousands of soldiers waiting, standards fluttering, armor shining beneath the rising sun, the silence before battle slowly giving way to shouted commands. Then movement. The armies advanced. Ancient historians describe desperate fighting. At several moments, the outcome remained uncertain. Alexander's left wing encountered severe pressure. Elsewhere, Persian cavalry nearly reached the Macedonian camp. Yet once again, Alexander identified a weakness. He led a concentrated attack toward Darius himself. The Persian king saw enemy cavalry breaking through. For the second time, he withdrew. Again, the psychological effect proved catastrophic. Order dissolved. The battle ended. And with it, the Achaemenid Empire effectively ceased to exist. One by one, the great capitals opened their gates. Babylon surrendered peacefully. Its temples remained intact. Its people largely accepted the new ruler. Then came Susa. Its immense treasury passed into Macedonian hands. Finally, Alexander marched toward Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persian kingship. Imagine the moment he first climbed those great staircases, the same steps once ascended by ambassadors from every corner of the empire, the same halls where generations of kings had celebrated Nowruz, the same columns that symbolized Persian greatness. Now, a foreign conqueror stood at their summit. The treasury astonished even seasoned soldiers. Gold, silver, jewels, precious objects accumulated across centuries. Ancient writers describe thousands of animals later carrying away portions of this immense wealth. Then came one of history's most famous acts of destruction. Persepolis burned. Why? Ancient authors disagree. Some blamed revenge. Alexander may have wished to punish Persia symbolically for Xerxes' invasion of Greece generations earlier. Others suggested drunken celebration. Still others believed destroying the ceremonial capital reduced the chance of future rebellion. Perhaps several motives combined. Whatever the reason, flames consumed magnificent halls. Wooden roofs collapsed. Smoke rose above one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. The empire's physical symbol became ruins. Yet the story was not finished. Darius still lived. He fled eastward, hoping loyal provinces would provide another army. But time had run out. Some of his own nobles concluded resistance had become hopeless. One of them, Bessus, turned against the king. Darius was arrested, then mortally wounded during the chaotic retreat. When Alexander finally reached him, the last Achaemenid king lay dying. Ancient accounts describe Alexander covering the fallen ruler with his own cloak. Whether every detail occurred exactly as later writers described cannot be known, but Alexander certainly understood the political importance of honoring the defeated monarch. He no longer wished to appear merely as Persia's conqueror. He wished to become its successor. Bessus declared himself king. His rebellion lasted only briefly. Alexander pursued him relentlessly. Eventually, the usurper was captured, delivered for execution, and punished as both traitor and murderer. With Darius gone, Alexander inherited more than territory. He inherited responsibility. Instead of dismantling every Persian institution, he preserved many of them. Satraps often remained in office. Persian administrators continued serving. Royal ceremonies increasingly incorporated Persian customs. Alexander even adopted elements of Persian dress, married into Iranian nobility, and encouraged cooperation between Macedonian and Persian elites. Some of his own companions disliked these changes. They believed their king was becoming too Persian. Alexander disagreed. He understood something essential. Conquering an empire differed from governing it. The Persian system had succeeded for 2 centuries. Destroying everything would have been foolish. His dream extended beyond victory. He imagined creating a new world where Greek and Persian traditions blended together. Whether that dream could ever have succeeded remains one of history's great unanswered questions, because Alexander himself would not live long enough to discover the answer. Only a few years later, in Babylon, still in his early 30s, he died unexpectedly. Almost immediately, his enormous empire fragmented. Generals divided territories. Former allies became rivals. The political unity Alexander created vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared. Yet something remarkable happened. Although the Persian Empire had fallen, Persian civilization endured. Languages survived. Customs continued. Administrative traditions remained useful. Artists kept creating. Farmers kept cultivating fields. Poets continued telling stories. Children still grew up hearing the names of Cyrus, Darius, and the kings who had ruled before Alexander ever crossed into Asia. Empires may disappear. Civilizations often do not. Persia had lost its throne, but it had not lost its memory. And in time, that memory would inspire new kingdoms, new literature, new heroes, and eventually, stories that would travel across the world. surviving far longer than any empire ever could. Although Alexander had conquered the Persian Empire, he had not conquered Persian civilization. That distinction matters. Empires rise. Empires expand. Empires fall. History repeats that pattern again and again, yet civilizations often prove far more resilient. Their ideas, their language, their art, their stories, their way of understanding the world. These things can survive long after kings and armies disappear. Persia became one of history's greatest examples of that truth. The Achaemenid dynasty had ended. Its palaces stood damaged. Its royal family vanished from power. But Persian identity remained alive, generation after generation. People continued telling stories about the great kings of the past, about Cyrus, about Darius, about magnificent cities that had once stood at the center of the world, about gardens that seemed like paradise, about princes raised to rule vast kingdoms. The political empire had fallen. The cultural empire had not. Centuries passed. New kingdoms rose across Iranian lands. The Parthians established another powerful empire. Later, the Sasanians revived Persian royal traditions even more deliberately. Their kings looked back toward the ancient Achaemenids with admiration. They rebuilt imperial institutions, celebrated Persian identity, supported literature, architecture, scholarship, and once again, Persia became one of the great powers of the ancient world. The royal courts changed. Religions gradually evolved. Borders shifted. But the memory of earlier greatness never disappeared. Sasanian rulers wanted people to remember. They wanted every new generation to understand that they belonged to an ancient civilization whose history stretched far beyond their own lifetimes. Stories became one of the most powerful ways to preserve that memory. Across centuries, poets, scholars, and storytellers collected ancient traditions. Some stories preserve fragments of real history. Others blended historical figures with legend. Some transformed ordinary kings into larger-than-life heroes. Others invented adventures that expressed deeper truths about courage, loyalty, justice, and sacrifice. History slowly became mythology, not because people forgot reality, but because storytelling allowed history to remain alive. Perhaps the greatest example of this tradition appeared around the beginning of the 11th century, when the Persian poet Ferdowsi completed one of the greatest literary works ever written, the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, containing tens of thousands of verses. It told the story of Persia from the creation of the world until the Arab conquest. Within its pages lived legendary rulers, warriors, princes, heroes, villains, battles, romances, triumphs, and heartbreaking tragedies. Some characters had historical foundations. Others belonged entirely to epic tradition. Yet together, they created something extraordinary. A cultural memory shared across generations. One of the Shahnameh's most famous stories tells of Rostam, the greatest hero of Persia, a warrior whose strength became legendary. Unknowingly, he one day faced his own son, Sohrab, on the battlefield. Neither recognized the other. They fought with all their skill. Only after Sohrab received a mortal wound did the terrible truth emerge. Father and son had unknowingly become enemies. It remains one of world literature's greatest tragedies. A reminder that war often destroys precisely what people hope to protect. Stories like these shaped Persian identity for centuries. They reminded listeners that power alone never guaranteed happiness, that wisdom mattered alongside courage, that honor often demanded sacrifice, that even heroes carried deep flaws. Another remarkable collection of stories gradually emerged over many generations, known today as 1001 Nights, or simply the Arabian Nights. Despite its popular name, many of its most famous tales carry strong Persian influence. The collection itself blended traditions from Persia, India, the Arab world, and beyond. At its heart stood one unforgettable storyteller, Scheherazade. Faced with certain death, she chose not violence, but stories. Each night she began a tale. Each dawn she left it unfinished. Curiosity saved her life. Night after night, story after story, until eventually the king himself changed. The tale reminds us that stories possess extraordinary power. They preserve memory, teach wisdom, transform hearts, and outlive the generations that first tell them. Within those pages appeared adventures involving distant kingdoms, wise rulers, treacherous advisors, hidden treasures, enchanted palaces, lost cities, dangerous journeys, and clever heroes who survived not only through strength, but through intelligence. Those themes would echo across centuries, eventually reaching writers, artists, filmmakers, and game designers. Long after the ancient world had disappeared, Persian culture continued shaping civilization in countless other ways. Its scholars contributed to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, engineering, philosophy. Its architects influenced buildings stretching from Central Asia to India. The magnificent gardens first perfected in ancient Persia inspired royal landscapes across the Islamic world. Even the famous gardens surrounding places, such as the Taj Mahal, reflected principles developed centuries earlier in Persia. Persian carpets became symbols of artistic excellence. Persian poetry crossed languages. Persian miniature paintings displayed astonishing detail. Their brilliant colors, elegant figures, and carefully balanced compositions preserved scenes from epic literature for future generations. Many modern artistic images associated with ancient Persia draw inspiration from these masterpieces. The Persian language itself became one of the great literary languages of the medieval world. Poets such as Rumi, Hafez, Sadi, and Omar Khayyam wrote works that continue to be translated and read around the globe. Their words crossed borders, religions, and centuries, speaking to universal human experiences: love, loss, hope, mortality, wonder. By the 20th century, another new form of storytelling appeared: video games. In the late 1980s, a young designer named Jordan Mechner searched for an idea that would feel different from traditional fantasy. Instead of castles inspired by medieval Europe, he looked toward the stories and artwork of the Middle East, especially Persian-inspired settings and the atmosphere of the old adventure tales. The result became Prince of Persia, released in 1989. Its revolutionary animation, its fluid movement, its elegant palace environments, and its cinematic style made it unlike anything players had experienced before. The prince himself had no official historical identity. He represented an ideal, a brave young royal navigating danger through intelligence, agility, and determination. The setting blended imagination with inspiration drawn from Persian architecture, traditional storytelling, and the visual beauty of ancient courts. Years later, the series evolved again. Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, introduced magical elements. The legendary dagger of time, acrobatic movement impossible for any ordinary person, and a prince whose greatest enemy often became his own mistakes. These stories belonged entirely to fantasy, yet beneath the supernatural elements, many echoes of history remained. Magnificent palaces inspired by Persepolis, royal families struggling with succession, ancient kingdoms, court intrigue, gardens, columns, ceremonial halls, and the idea that a prince carried responsibilities far greater than himself. The games never claimed historical accuracy. They were adventures, works of imagination, but imagination often grows strongest when rooted in something real. The real Persian princes did not rewind time. They could not leap effortlessly across impossible chasms. They possessed no enchanted daggers. What they did possess was perhaps equally remarkable. They governed one of history's greatest empires. They grew up within extraordinary palaces, studied languages, religion, administration, military strategy, led armies, faced rebellions, navigated deadly palace politics, made decisions affecting millions. Some ruled wisely, others failed spectacularly. Some died peacefully, many did not. Their lives required no magic to become fascinating. History had already provided enough drama. When we look back across 25 centuries, certain names continue standing above the rest. Cyrus the Great, who transformed a regional kingdom into a world empire. Darius, who organized that empire into one of history's most efficient states. Xerxes, whose campaigns against Greece became legendary. Artaxerxes, who struggled to preserve stability amid growing internal tensions. Cyrus the Younger, whose failed rebellion revealed how dangerous royal ambition could become. Darius III, who faced one of history's greatest military commanders under impossible circumstances. Each lived different lives. Each confronted different challenges. Together, they formed the real history behind the legend. The ruins of Persepolis still rise beneath the Iranian sky. Visitors continue climbing the same staircases once used by ambassadors from across the ancient world. The carved delegations still carry their gifts. The stone guardians still watch silently over the entrance. The columns still reach upward, though their wooden roofs disappeared long ago. Standing there today, it becomes easier to understand why Persia captured human imagination so completely. The stones themselves seem to remember. They remind us that civilizations are not measured only by conquest, but by what they leave behind. Ideas, art, architecture, stories, knowledge, beauty. The Persian Empire eventually vanished. Yet its influence continues appearing in places many people never notice. Words in modern languages, garden design, literature, religious thought, scientific traditions, architecture, and even entertainment enjoyed by millions around the world. The Prince of Persia, then, exists in two forms: One belongs to history, the countless real princes who walked through royal courtyards, studied beneath palace roofs, led armies across deserts and mountains, faced impossible political choices, and shaped one of humanity's greatest civilizations. The other belongs to imagination, a fictional hero racing across palace walls, escaping deadly traps, defying impossible, and reminding us that adventure remains timeless. Both versions matter. One teaches us about the past. The other keeps curiosity alive. Sometimes fiction becomes the doorway through which people discover real history. A player finishes a game, then wonders, was Persia really like this? Did these palaces truly exist? Were there actually kings called Darius, Xerxes, and Cyrus? The search begins. Curiosity leads toward archaeology, ancient texts, museums, historical research, and suddenly, a video game has become the first step toward understanding one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Perhaps that is the greatest achievement of all. Not perfect historical accuracy, but inspiration, the ability to encourage someone to look beyond fantasy, toward the remarkable reality that inspired it. History and legend are not enemies. They often travel together. History provides the foundation. Legend gives it wings. Each generation retells old stories in new forms. Ancient poets became medieval storytellers. Medieval storytellers inspired artists. Artists inspired filmmakers. Game designers created interactive adventures. And somewhere beneath every new version, the memory of ancient Persia continues quietly enduring. As our journey finally comes to its end, imagine once more the sun setting over Persepolis, golden light touching the great columns, long shadows stretching across carved staircases, a gentle breeze moving through gardens where water once flowed. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of horses returning through the palace gates. A young prince finishes another day's lessons, unaware that centuries later, people across the world will still remember civilizations like his. The empire itself has long since passed into history, but its spirit survives in books, in museums, in poetry, in ruins, in stories, and in every curious mind willing to look beyond legend to discover the extraordinary reality that inspired it. The Prince of Persia may be fictional, but the civilization that gave birth to that idea was real. Its kings were real. Its cities were real. Its achievements were real. And after more than 2,000 years, their story is still being told. Thank you for joining this journey through the history behind a legend. And until the next story, may the echoes of ancient Persia continue to remind us that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones that truly happened.